because Jesus died for the undeserving. We are to love each other even when we're sinned against. Would somebody read 1 Peter 4 and verse 8? 1 Peter 4 and verse 8. Carmen? Before I move on with that verse, when I said we were to love even when we're sinned against, we're very tempted sometimes to hold grudges. If you tell somebody sometimes, you've got to love the brethren, the response you get back is, you don't understand what they did to me. I've heard this recently from them. You don't understand what they did to me. I don't. But I understand what you've done to God and what I've done to God. And he forgives over and over and over. Has he forgiven you over and over and over? Then you forgive over and over and over. Jesus said, freely you've received, freely give. Now back to this verse. I love this verse. Because I grew up in church. And one thing you find growing up in church is it's a revolving door. Everybody gets mad at everybody else and they leave and go find a different church. Faces change. Our last church we were in before we came here, I was there for a total of 18 years. In 18 years, it was like a whole different church. So many faces left and so many faces came, back and forth, back and forth. I can tell you why most of them left there. This person's mad at the pastor. This person's mad at the song leader. This person's mad at the youth pastor. This person's mad at this person over here. Love covers many sins. This verse doesn't mean that we cover up for people's sins because we love them. What it means is that we don't let sins come between us because we love one another. Well, he offended me, but I love him. He probably didn't mean it. In fact, he's a better Christian than I am, so I'm probably just taking things out of proportion. I'm going to forgive him. That's what Peter's talking about here. Love covers sins. Love doesn't just pick up our toys and go to a different sandbox. Love forgives. Love heals. Love unites. Love causes us to forgive quickly. Go back to 1 John 3, if you're not there. 1 John 3. In verse 16, we understand the love of God. We perceive the love of God because of the sacrifice of Jesus. We look to Jesus. We look to the cross and we say, that's how we're to love. That's how we're to love. And so we ought to offer ourselves for one another in the same way. Because Christ laid down his life for us, we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Now, the word ought here is not being used as we use it in English today. Today we use it in the sense of optional. You ought to change your oil, but if you don't, your car will just blow up. It's fine. You ought to, but you don't have to. No one's going to come with a gun from the government and say, come on, it's time to change your oil. John isn't saying that we should lay down our lives for one another, but we don't have to. That's not what he's saying. In the Bible, the word carries the sense of duty bound, right? Men ought always to pray and not to faint. That's not an option. They're duty bound. Men ought to love their wives as their own selves. That's not an option. They're duty bound to do that. And so John says, because Christ laid down his life for us, we are duty bound to lay down our lives for one another. There is a divine obligation to self-sacrificing love. If someone you know needs a ride, you need to take them. If they need to borrow a car and you have two of them, you're duty bound to loan them your car. If they need food, you're duty bound to bring them food. If they're going through struggles and need a late night conversation, you're obligated to be available. If someone in the church loses their home and you have extra room, you're obligated to bring them in to your home. In the early church, I've mentioned this before, in the first 200-300 years of the church, you have famines go across the land, and families would fast so that that day's ration could go to somebody who didn't have any food. So our family would eat on Monday, And then we would fast on Tuesday so that Reuben and Gloria could have food. That's how we would do. And then we'd eat again on Wednesday. And then Thursday we'd fast, and then they'd do the same thing. They'd fast certain days, and they just shared their food. They sacrificed of themselves to share their food. When I was a teenager, I went to a different church than my mom. I left our church and went to the church where my Christian school was at. And this church was, Bakersfield's very spread out. Very, very, very spread out. And from where I lived to my church, I would say it's probably about like driving from here to Norwalk. Okay, can I give you an idea how far it was? And my mom's church was about the same distance the other direction. So she couldn't take me to church. But what people did for like 2.5 years, when they heard I had no ride to church, is everyone volunteered. Everyone. I mean, I had more rides than I knew what to do with. I'm turning people down because I had other rides scheduled. Go back home again. I've never forgotten that self-sacrifice. Love covers. I didn't have beef with anybody in that church. You know why? We loved one another. We loved each other. Verse 17. But whoso hath this world's good and seeth his brother have need and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? How could someone be in need and we shut our hearts to them? That's what bowels means. It means heart, our inner being, the seat of our emotion, our affection. How could we have the love that drove Jesus to the cross, yet it doesn't drive us to give of ourselves willingly? The love that drove Jesus to the cross, if that love is in us, if that spirit is in us, it will drive us to do the same thing that Jesus did. Let me show you an example. Go to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Second Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. Paul says here, moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction, in the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty, abounded under the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power, that's important, beyond their power, they were willing of themselves, praying us. That word praying means beseeching, begging us, with much entreaty, with much pleadings, that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of ministering to the saints. So these saints in Macedonia were poor. They were so poor, Paul seems to imply they didn't need to give. He didn't expect them to give to help the saints in Jerusalem who needed help. They practically